Welcome to those of you who are with us online. We had some problems with the internet earlier this morning, but they got it fixed in time for my class, so that's all that's important. So we're in good shape. Well, we're going to pick up today in the 5th chapter of Mark, and really interesting series of events in Jesus' 3-year ministry happened right about this time, most of it in the area of Capernaum. Jesus got into the boat again, and he's been over on the other side where he has had this run-in with the demon-possessed person and has driven the legion of demons out, and they have entered into a herd of pigs and run into the Sea of Galilee. And now he has returned to the boat, and they are going back across to the Capernaum side. When they got there, a large crowd had gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. "My little daughter is dying," he said. "Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live." And Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding, some versions say crushing, around him. So here we have him being completely surrounded and crushed by this adoring crowd. A woman in the crowd has suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She has suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and has spent all she had. Can you relate to that? Not the bleeding, but the doctors. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. I don't know what her issue was. Different theologians have proposed a different medical diagnosis to describe what her condition was, but we're frankly not told. Whatever it was, it had been persistent for a long time, and we can certainly understand that she would have been physically deeply affected by that. She would certainly be suffering from anemia, from weakness, from fatigue, from pain, and there would be the continual threat of infection. Maybe even worse than that for her, if it could be worse, were the social and spiritual aspects of it. Socially, in accordance with the law of Moses, of course, she was unclean. And being unclean, she was isolated, stigmatized, impoverished. There were very few ways that she could make a living, and she had no one to make a living for her. And then whatever little bit she had exhausted, seeking help from the medical profession, such as it was in that day. Spiritually, she was considered unclean and excluded from the temple, excluded from the community, excluded from her own family. We have a hard time, grasping that's so foreign to our culture. But that's the world they lived in, and that's where she found herself. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his, different translations say, cloak or garment or robe, because she thought, if I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. The garment that she touched, or the part of the garment that she touched, in all probability, was one of the tassels. The piece of Jesus' garment was no doubt there are 4 tassels. They're called tzitzit in Hebrew, and they hang down from his cloak or from his prayer shawl. Today they even wear them on their shirts, but you'll see them everywhere in Israel. You'll see them here if you're in a place where there are Orthodox Jews. They still wear them today. They wear 4 of them. Each of the tassels has 8 threads and 5 sets of knots. That totals up to 13. And then the gematria, and that is a word that means if you take a Hebrew word and take the numeric value of each letter of that word and add it up, you come up with a total number. And as you know, in Hebrew, numbers are very, very significant. So if you take the gematria of the word tzitzit, which is the tassel that hangs down, the word itself adds up to the number 600. Then if you add to that the number of tassels that they wore and the knots that made up the tassel, total of 13, you get up to the number of 613. And that's very, very intentional, and that is to remind the wearers all the time of the commands of the Torah. As you know, there were 10 commands, but there were 613 commandments to enforce and support the 10 commandments. And those were a very sacred number to them, and it was a sacred obligation to them. They earned their salvation by keeping explicitly and perfectly all 613 of the commands. And these tassels that hung from their garments were a continual reminder, and still are, of the 613 commands of Torah as they are specified in the 15th chapter of Numbers. That it very likely is what she touched. This is kind of what they look like. You can see them hanging off of the prayer shawl there on the left, and then a close-up of them in the middle. They didn't have to all be blue, but one needed to be blue. And then you can see them hanging from the waist there of a modern Orthodox Jew. Does that sound a little bit superstitious to you? The idea of touching something and being healed? It's not without precedent. Matthew 14:35, when the people recognized Jesus, the news of his arrival spread quickly throughout the whole area, and soon people were bringing all of their sick to be healed. They begged him to let the sick touch at least the fringe of his robe, and all who touched him were healed. So this woman with the issue of blood was not the only or a unique instance of that. It was something that happened in other occasions as well. Also in Acts 19:12, we see the miraculous efficacy of the handkerchiefs and the aprons which had been in contact with Paul's body. They were used as a healing opportunity. And kind of a strange one, Acts 5:15, the healing influence of the shadow of Peter falling on the sick as he passed along the street seemed to have a healing efficacy. Just if you could lie on the side of Peter away from where the sun was so that his shadow would fall on you as he walked by. Of course, we know that all of this has to do with faith, right? Faith in Christ, I think, is a very broad and inclusive term. It's accepted and blessed by the Master in all of his many degrees of development, from the simple shape it displays in this woman by simply touching the tassel on his garment, all the way up to the heights of faith that were exhibited by Stephen and Paul as they laid down their life, and so many others have in time since. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then a woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and trembled with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter," and this is the only time that we have recorded where Jesus addressed somebody as daughter. I'm not saying it's the only time he did it. It's the only time that the gospel writers address it. He said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." A really remarkable story, and like so much of the narrative in the Gospels, it's just 3 or 4 short verses. But there's so much that is incorporated in this. I want to share with you, and some of you have already seen this, I know, if you've watched the Chosen series. But this is the way that the Chosen videos have put flesh and blood on this. And this is a longer excerpt than I usually show. And I started to edit it, but I said, no, I don't think I will, because it's just it really fleshes out and dramatically, in a very positive way, shows the events that we have just read about, but in such a broader way. They create a storyline. They give the woman a name. Her name is Veronica. They didn't pull that out of air. That's just one of the traditions that have grown out of the first century, that her name was Veronica. It's going to start off with Veronica and Peter's wife meeting. Her name, Peter's wife, is Eden, like the garden. And they're going to make this acquaintanceship. And part of the storyline, too, and I'll just tell you this so that you'll understand it when you hear it in the video. This is a time in Eden's life where she and Peter are having some marital difficulties. And it comes from the fact that Peter is gone most of the time. Ladies, can you relate to that? Have you ever had a husband who's gone more than he's home? And Eden was feeling the pressure of that. In addition, during that time, she had had a miscarriage. And she has seen all of the miracles that Jesus is doing, but she's lost her child. And to make it worse, Peter's not there. This is a storyline. I know it's not in your Bible. I understand that. But it puts meat on the bones. So I think you'll understand the rest of it. And it's longer than usual, but I think that you'll find it to be very illuminating and moving. And if you want to shed a tear or two, I'll join you, okay? Well, what'd you think? Make it a little bit more real? Everything in it, as far as I know, is very consistent with the culture and the times and the events as they're briefly described in our text. So what do we learn from the woman with the bleeding problem? Well, I think most of it's pretty apparent to me, at least. Sure to you too. It all comes down to faith. There was certainly a lesson in persistence, was there not? It was not an easy thing for her to get to where he was, and arriving in the vicinity to get through the crowd to get to him was a major obstacle, challenge. There's a great deal of courage to seek and approach, knowing that she would certainly be condemned for even making the effort by those who didn't understand. And then there's the demonstration of Jesus' compassion and his accessibility and his willingness to respond to one person's needs. Those were some of the things that I thought of. Are there other ideas or discussions or comments or questions that anyone else has? Mike, have I left you speechless? Let me get Jeff.
I think that was really good, Lanny. And that is so awesome.
Thank you. I do too. Do you want to add something, John?
Yeah. What I just saw on there, it was amazing. If she had not went up to him and she would never been healed, like she said. She's been sick for about 11 years, and as soon as he put his hands on her, he said, "Rise up, and you are healed, and you are free." And that's why she went in, and that's why she would never have been healed if he had not put his hands on her at all.
Yeah. One of the classic lines from that video, in fact, I think they put it onto some of their T-shirts, was just the two words, "Look up." Look up.
The thought that comes to mind is everybody was against her. She had that, and we see in posts, those that are on Facebook and everything, people that are struggling with depression or whatever, everything's against me, but you just have to move forward. And while I got the mic, no time, better time for a plug. I think January or February when the next season's to be released.
It's coming. Anybody else?
We noticed that so many would not go near her, but she was approached by Jesus' followers, and she was encouraged. So God still put a person in her path to further encourage her to do so.
Yeah, and what does that say about Jesus' followers today? Are we ready and willing and available to reach out to the untouchables, the disincluded? Jesus is so totally countercultural. Everything about this was countercultural. It's all about the individual, human suffering. Love over law.
The one thing that struck me in that was when he was bending down and talking to her, was he said, "I'm so glad that we met each other." She was looking for something and he was looking to give something. The fact that his followers met her, I relate that to us. We are his followers. And we are to go out and find the ones that are looking for something. as she was looking for something and giving them that hope to find it so that they may be healed. Does that make sense?
Yes. And what his followers, what Thaddeus and the other apostle did, number one, they were willing to approach her. They had sympathy for her. But then what did they do? They took her to the Master. They took her to Jesus. And that's what we can always do. When we're incapable of solving a problem, we always have the option of taking him to Jesus. Well, that's just the first major event in this particular day. This was a very eventful day for Jesus. And, of course, he was interrupted by her on his way to the house of Jairus. And now, as they're beginning again to make their way, actually while they're still there dealing with the woman with the issue of blood, some people come up from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, with the very sad news that your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? You had great faith that he could heal her, but unfortunately, the timing was bad. She's dead. And Jesus, and there's a difference of opinion on the translation here. Some of the translations say overhearing, others say disregarding or not heeding, not paying any attention to it, to what they said, told Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. That's pretty profound, isn't it? Jairus has just been told, this daughter that you love so much that you're willing to put yourself out, which would probably not be popular with the other leaders of the synagogues. He's gone in spite of that, risking his reputation, if you will, to Jesus based on his faith that Jesus can heal his daughter that he loves dearly. And now, before Jesus can get to her, he's told she's dead. You're too late. You waited too long. And Jesus said, don't pay attention to them. Ignore them. And don't be afraid. Just believe. Can you imagine what's going on in Jairus' mind right now? I mean, this is a roller coaster. And why would Jesus tell me, he's just heard that my daughter's dead. Why would he tell me to have faith now? It's over. It's done. They laughed at him. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child's not dead, but asleep. And they laughed at him. I can understand that. They've already witnessed this. They've seen this girl lying there without breath in her body, without a pulse. He hadn't been in yet. And he laughed at him. Well, we're going to see what happens, and of course you know what happens, but we're going to unpack that next week, Lord willing, and we'll see what we can glean from the event of Jesus as he confronts the dead body of the daughter of the synagogue ruler Jairus. Well, thank you for your presence and your participation, and I hope that you have a deeper understanding and an even higher regard now for this event in the life of Jesus concerning this woman with the issue of blood. Have a wonderful God bless week.